difficult, but it can be done on pieces of land, and there are ranchers all over the country doing it. Bison's native rangeland literally went from Alaska down past Mexico City and from, east coast to west coast. They are really well suited to this land, and yeah, they're roaming around, eating the grass, leaving deposits. One of the things they did when they wallow, when they roll in the dirt, they pick up grass seeds and then spread them to other areas. With that alone, they're helping move and keep the prairies and grasses beautiful. As we try and force nature to do things, whether it be, cattle or growing grass, anytime you're working against the natural flow of things, it's difficult. The more natural it is, the easier it is, because you're not fighting things, you're working with them. You're working within the system. That's personally why I believe bison are just such a useful animal in this time.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Decentralized Radio. Today, we have Ron Miskin on the line. Ron, how's it going?
Doing great. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, Ron and I connected in person actually back in January, I believe, at the National Bison Association Winter Conference, which was really cool experience. And yeah, met a lot of great folks there. And then we kind of stayed in touch on Twitter. He is in the buffalo wool business as well as a homesteader, and he's just got back from Alaska. So maybe we talk about that a little bit. You're spending your summers up in Alaska every summer for many years, correct?
Yeah, this has been 14 years, and it's been awesome. It's the most beautiful place in the world, and if you like to fish, you cannot beat it. So it works good for us. There's a starting to burgeon bison industry going on up there. There's more ranchers than I've ever seen, and that's exciting. But for us, mostly it's selling socks.
So is that what drew you up there originally? Was the market, or you just wanted to go there to fish for the summer, and kind of it happened to be a good place to sell the wool products?
Well, originally I got invited up to a sportsman show up in Wasilla by this really neat guy named Tony Ross, who's written a couple of really cool books on hunting. I wanted to go meet Tony, so I went up, did the show. It was in March, and not a lot of fun in March. I mean, ice fishing is bad then, which, and the rest of the fishing is even worse because there's just nothing running. But went up in March, sold a bunch of socks, made some just amazing friends. And that's kind of what's kept us going back, is the people. We have met, so many interesting folks. From one of our favorite groups is a lot of dog sled mushers, and that's just a really fascinating sport with some cool people. But we found that Alaska is just a great market for our product. People understand how well things need to work, and our stuff kind of works there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense for sure that you could probably sell more wool socks in Alaska than Texas, I'd imagine, just because the temperatures and the people are, aware and open to that. So
it's a good place, especially in August. And that's what we've done for the last 14 years, is just get out of Texas in August and go see where fall starts. And I like standing in rivers. So that's the fun part.
Is that like fly fishing, and is that like the best in the US, you think, overall?
Absolutely, it's the best in the world. And fly fishing is great. And then there's this really interesting method when the salmon are running and they're not really feeding, called flossing, which you kind of do with a fly or a hook, just with a little bit of yarn tied to it. But basically, you're trying to snag them in the mouth, and that's an interesting way to fish. So, but it works.
Are you? Yeah, that's interesting, because actually we were at Green River, on the Green River, and the salmon, the kokanee salmon, the landlocked salmon, were actually spawning. They had swam all the way upstream, and someone was telling me that you don't really want to eat the salmon that are kind of swimming upstream and spawning, because they're basically like zombified by the time they make it all the way up, and they're just gonna lay their eggs and die.
They're
Is that true?
Yeah, that is very true. By the time they're spawned out, you really don't want to eat them. But when they're coming in from the ocean and starting to head up the rivers, that's not a bad time to catch a few fish.
And are you eating a good amount of these fish, or none, or some, or what's your stance?
No, we pretty much harvest all of our own protein, whether it be bison, beef, turkey, pig, chicken, and fish. We provide all of our own stuff harvested from nature.
Yeah, that's badass. And I think that's the right mindset too, is like, I think it's kind of weird that fishing has become, well, it's also a byproduct of the quality of the waterways. And maybe that's also why, you know, going to Alaska is really nice. You're getting, you know, less runoff and things like that. So you can actually feel confident about eating the fish. But yeah, to me, it's quite strange that most of the, you know, fishing sportsmen out there are not they have no desire to eat what they catch. And I talk about with my friend quite a bit that, you know, there's obviously some impact just releasing a fish after you catch it like many times on the fish's health, and you might as well eat it, or, you know, that's kind of a controversial opinion probably, but I think when you're into this hunting, harvesting, self-sovereignty mindset, it's like, yeah, this is the reason why fishing exists in the first place, was to provide us a food source.
Absolutely. And we have a very strong opinion on waste. Okay, don't harvest anything that you're not going to use every part of. And that's really led into our business. I mean, what we do is basically a byproduct of the bison meat industry. People raise bison for meat. They're delicious. It's great for you, you know, very clean quality meat. But what was happening is they were using some of the leather, but burning the hair off to tan the hides. So instead of wasting it, we started harvesting the hair and processing it into yarn and turning it into socks and stuff. So with anything that you harvest, I mean, we have sort of an obligation to be good conservator of our environment, and don't take more than you need, and don't waste. That's the biggest thing. There is plenty out there. Just got to be careful with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the right mindset, the right attitude, because yeah, we've gotten to this weird state where, you know, it's like just been neglected for a long time, whether it's, you know, the organ meats or the hides and the byproducts of, you know, beef or something like bison, of course. And then yeah, the fish are just taken for granted. Oh, they're not really, you know, it's different. People compare a fish to like a cow, and they have a different like feeling about it for some reason, but it's the same principle. And you want to make sure, yeah, like you said, you're doing right by the environment, because it is a, you know, a treasure, a very blessed thing that you can go out and fish or hunt in these beautiful areas. So I think that's important. But yeah, maybe I want to get into the wool space a little bit. Were you working with a bunch of bison ranches, or like how did you get introduced to the bison industry and then come up with this idea, I guess, that, hey, there's a byproduct, maybe we can make a business out of this?
All right. Am I back? Sorry, I had it offline.
Yeah.
Okay. I did not come up with the idea, and I'm not going to take any credit for it at all. I got into the bison industry through my father. When we moved to Texas, Dad, first thing he did was bought a small ranch and then started playing with all sorts of animals. We have raised everything from pot-bellied pigs to miniature horses, pheasant, quail, and then bison showed up. And that's what started our family in the bison industry, and we've been doing it now 40 plus years. But the wool was originally, the Native Americans have understood the benefits of bison fiber for a long time. I mean, the bison was basically the Walmart of the plains. Use every part, and it can provide shelter, food, and clothing. The more modern version of it was back in the 1800s. The original Buffalo Wool Company was started by the Hudson Bay Company, 1871 in Red River, Manitoba. They started when we were basically killing all the bison. They were shipping the hides to England and turning them into women's hosiery in the late 1800s. Company didn't last long. Basically, we killed all the animals, and so it kind of went by the wayside. Then as there's been a little bit more resurgence in the bison industry. There's more fiber available. So we kind of rediscovered and not really discovered. But looking now that there is enough to be processed commercially, because that's been the biggest hurdle, is having enough fiber to go through the commercial processing and turn it into something useful. But we're getting there, and it's been growing. I've been doing this now since 2005, and every year we've had an increase in our ability to produce and an increase in our harvest.
So that, I guess that's a testament to the increase in bison that are being ranched in general, right? And I've talked to Cody Spencer, which I think maybe you knew. He was at the conference as well, and I'm friends with him. And he's saying that there's kind of like this rise in, bison ranching up until like the early 2000s, but really it's kind of been like flattish since. I thought it was more so just kind of like straight up and to the right, but I guess it ebbs and flows. So I'm curious on your thoughts there. And are you seeing this outlook in the future that, the bison industry is going to just continue to grow significantly?
Personally, I believe so, and I'm betting on it in a big way. I mean, pretty much my entire life is bet on bison. We've watched it grow from the early 2000s. When I started doing this, bison meat was starting to gain acceptance, and it was starting to get a little bit of demand. I think the demand today is tenfold what it was in 2005, and I think that the commercial acceptance has been a lot greater. When we first started doing this, I'd be out trying to say, "Here, have you ever touched bison fiber before?" And people would make comments about, "Aren't they endangered?" Or, "How can you be doing this with those great animals?" And then trying to explain where the reason that bison have made such a great comeback is because they are commercially viable. People enjoy eating them, and because of that, people enjoy raising them. I've watched the number of bison ranches and the amount of bison available just spike continuously, and I don't see any real change in that. I think more and more people are understanding how to get meat to market, because that's the biggest challenge. So,
yeah, the marketing aspect is always tough, and especially when you have a premium product, and which bison is, and then also, you might be spending more on infrastructure, need more land, or things. There's not as easy of a copy paste blueprint to maybe cattle, raising Angus or something like that. But maybe you can shed some light on what you've kind of experienced and learned raising bison yourself, or working with ranches, working on ranches. What are the trade-offs, the pros, the cons compared to raising cattle?
That's a really good question. And in some ways they're a lot easier to raise. In some ways they're much more difficult. Infrastructure, like you mentioned, is probably the biggest hurdle to getting into raising bison. Having a piece of land is wonderful, but keeping them on that land is crucial. So making sure you have good fences, making sure you have adequate resources for them. Bison need friends. They are a herd animal. You can't have one. They will go find friends and tear down whatever it is in the process. So having a reasonable size herd, having water, grass, and they do like to roam. That is a very real thing. So having a place for them to go and feel like they can move as a herd has been a big thing. You can't just basically put them in a pen and leave them there. They'll get bored. As far as the easier side, things like medications. Bison aren't requiring the hormones, antibiotics, and steroids that are used in a lot of commercial cattle processing. So you don't have to do that. Helping them birth calves. That's not something you have to do with bison. They're very good at that. They can do it all on their own. So overall, the one big thing I've learned is that the more ranchers that are out there, the more they're willing to help educate, train, and mentor new ranchers. So as we get more, we're going to get more. And I think that's just going to kind of snowball as we go.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, just restoring the native large ruminant to its homeland. And something that's always brought up is just their resilience. And you're talking about down in Texas and then up in Alaska, like one species can be in the heat of Texas and the frigid cold of Alaska, and I think that's underrated, right? And that's probably one of the other main benefits. But what does it look like if we had 50% less cattle and that gap, that hole was filled with bison? What does that do to our ecosystems? What does that do to like our land, and replenishing that? Because obviously that's a huge concern right now. And yeah, it's something I think about. And will there be more incentive? Like right now, I forget the numbers, but it's like what, 200,000 or something bison are being ranched and like 150,000 cattle are slaughtered a day. So it's like, it's growing, but it's still such a small fraction.
Yeah, no, it is very small. The biggest difference in bison and cattle is the density that you can raise. And I mean, you can pack cattle into a feedlot, stuff them full of grain and skittles and processed meat in 18 to 24 months. Bison are going to take longer. They're going to take more grass, and it's not as dense a way to raise protein. So it is always going to be at a premium. Ranchers are going to understand that it's going to take more resources to get them to market. But I think overall, the consumer is going to push that demand. You mentioned talking about the land and the regenerative aspects of it. That's really why more ranchers will move towards bison, I believe. We watched Rome Ranch down just outside of Austin, Texas, and take a piece of land, 500 acres, that had just been overworked, overfarmed, and was just totally depleted of any nutrients in the soil. They put bison on the land and a couple of big chicken tractors, like 200 chickens per tractor, totally automated, that opened. And that was, I think they started 7 or 8 years ago. And we went down when they first moved animals to it and saw what it looked like. And I was just down there in June, and it's glorious. The recovery that the land has made, the amount of biodiversity that's back, the plant life, just the bugs, all of it. The soil is alive now. And that's really due to putting large ungulates that can process the above ground carbon and grass and turn it back into nutrients and put it back into the soil. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, and yeah, if you're not familiar, Rome Ranch is kind of like the marketing front of Force of Nature, and they've done really great stuff in Texas, and it just goes to show that we can restore ecosystems, but they're also doing rotational grazing, adaptive grazing practices, which is important as well. But bison probably are just better suited to doing this because this is their native land, this is their native environment. And yeah, it's really interesting to think about how it would have happened 150 to 200 plus years ago. These massive herds just coming through the Great Plains, like not leaving a single blade of grass unturned, but then not coming back for maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, and giving all that rest period and all that restoration, inspiring that restoration. So to me, it's always like, oh, wow, this is so cool. Like, how could we do this on like a larger scale? It'd be awesome if there was a co-op, let's say Rome Ranch is like a starting place. And then there's, a tract of like hundreds of miles or something between public land and other ranches who are on board. And then you could have an actual path for a bison herd to really roam and then tightly pack it and manage that herd as they're roaming, kind of like a cattle drive would have been, but with bison and really working to restore that land. So I don't know.
That's an amazing idea. I mean, I don't know how feasible it is in the modern age with
exactly highways.
So it's difficult, but it can be done on pieces of land, and there are ranchers all over the country doing it. You mentioned talking about the diversity from Texas to Alaska. Bison's native rangeland literally went from Alaska down past Mexico City and from, East Coast to West Coast. They are really well suited to this land. And yeah, they're roaming around and eating the grass, leaving deposits. And one of the things that I, learned not, a while ago was one of the things they did when they roll in the dirt, they pick up grass seeds and then spread them to other areas. So with that alone, they're helping move and keep the prairies and grasses beautiful. Their fiber, when they would shed it out on the plains, when they started, when they would roam the plains and do things, they would spread grass seed, and then the native ground birds would use their fiber for nesting material. They just were basically a whole biodiversity factory in themselves. And if anyone gets a chance, we're working on a movie currently about this called Native Prodigies of an Icon. The trailer and all the vlogs of it in process are available on YouTube under Yanasa TV. And if you want to see some more about bison ranches all over, that's a phenomenal way to actually see them.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. We'll have to link that. That's something you're involved in, and kind of what's the inspiration behind this?
Well, it's telling the story of the comeback, basically the greatest comeback in history, from the point of view of the people who are actually making it happen, not from a conservation government type situation, but because of ranchers all across the country, decentralized, if you will, who have put effort, time, and their money and labor into helping bring back bison and showing the story. So it's going to be the first time that the bison comeback has actually been told from a producer's point of view.
That's really cool. I'm excited to check that out. Wow. When's that supposed to come out fully?
That's a really good question, because going into the project, Charlie and Shauna Rankin, who are Yanasa TV, originally intended it to be a full-length documentary type 2-hour movie kind of thing. The only problem is the deeper you get into the story, the more of the story that you realize. They now have 60 hours of vlogs with 60 different ranches. There's no way to trim that into a 2-hour movie. There's just too much story. So I don't know what the final format's going to look like. But it should.
Gotcha.
The plans come out next year, and it's just, I know it's going to be amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to check that out, because there is so much that goes into it, and there's so much effort, there's so much variety, and that's something I want to get into a little bit. Is in Alaska, what is it like raising bison where it's freezing cold and there's snow maybe more than half the year? Is that an issue? Do they have to do anything additional with feed? I know they're really good at breaking through snow and getting to forage. Do they just need more land? I'm curious on how that looks, raising bison in Alaska.
It is just a more land situation. I mean, their heads are a giant snowplow. They don't really worry about that, but the grass has got to be under that snow for them to eat. Otherwise, you're supplementing with hay and things like that, which means you need to grow the grass in the summer. When you have a summer that is maybe 6 weeks long, you better get some grass growing. There are definitely challenges in it, but they were there before we were there, so the food is out there. They just got to get to it.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I thought about that too. Obviously, I'm working with the Bison Ranch here in Wyoming, and Wyoming winters are nothing short of harsh either, but maybe not as long as Alaska. So it's really fascinating, and again, it goes back to just they're sustainable by their own means, and that's because they evolved for this environment. They're the only large ruminant, large animal that made it past the last ice age, and they are designed to be able to survive and thrive in these extreme environments. Whereas cattle, you'll have to grow hay and then bring it in, transport. Like, it's just like a very inefficient process. And what Cody talked about last time is just how damaging like growing hay is for land. Like, just if that's all you're growing, it's a monocrop at the end of the day, which we know is terrible for the soil health. So if we could have less people raising cattle that need supplemental hay and supplemental alfalfa and all this, then we have bison. We can be more effective, more efficient in restoring land. And that's something I didn't really make that connection until recently, because the prices as well for everything has gone up tremendously to supplement that stuff.
Oh, exactly. And as we have, as we try and force nature to do things, whether it be, cattle or growing grass, anytime you're working against the natural flow of things, it's difficult. So the more natural it is, the easier it is, because you're not fighting things, you're working with them, and you're working within the system. That's personally why I believe bison are just such a useful animal in this time. If we're going to try and get our lands back healthy again, all this monocrop agriculture has just depleted soils, and if we don't put inputs back into it in a usable form, then we're just literally spraying chemicals on there to try and stimulate growth, and artificial fertilizers and things like that. Putting those back in doesn't generate good quality grass, doesn't generate good quality food in the long run. We're just poisoning ourselves slowly.
Yeah, it's so bad. And we talk about that a lot on this show for sure. And it's really incredible, because it should be incentivized, but because all the incentives are stacked in the opposite direction with, these inputs, these chemical inputs, high input, high output style, the subsidies behind like grains. That's why, like feedlot, and of course, just pure yield, feedlot beef is so cheap. But after a while, it's just like unsustainable. So I'm just curious. I've noticed that for some reason, people are like, there's a better perception of bison in the common sphere compared to beef. So like if you're selling beef or you're eating a lot of beef, someone might just say, oh, that's bad for the environment or something like that. But bison, for some reason, they think, oh, that's great, or that's good, or bison's healthier. And you could get into the nuances of that, of course. And we're talking about how they are probably better. But if it's weirdly like way more positive connotation, which is a good thing. So I'm curious, are there any incentive programs, or is there a push from, the government or state legislation to incentivize more producers to raise bison versus cattle, or not really? That's not really a thing.
Short answer is I'm going to say not really. Now,
Okay.
the National Bison Association is an absolutely phenomenal organization who has done more for bison ranchers than anything, and they've made some great strides both legislatively and practically. So there have been some benefits. There are now some programs trying to use more bison meat in school districts and putting bison back on native reservations, and I think those incentives are wonderful. From a small producer point of view, though, it's really difficult to get an animal from your pasture processed and into the market, and that's where the disincentives come from. So there's a balance, and I don't know if it's a balance or not, but that's what I've seen. Is it's very difficult to get an animal inspected. There's weird rules on bison. I can't export bison socks to Canada without having to go through an APHIS inspection.
Wow.
Sheep don't typically have to do. Again, there's some weird legislation, and Jim at the National Bison Association is an absolutely amazing guy who's done a lot of great work and continues to do so. And I think that we will get this straightened out. I do think that in the future there will be more incentives for raising bison for all the reasons you just mentioned. They are better for the land. There is a ecological benefit to them versus feedlot cattle. The difficulty being, though, that there will never be anywhere near the level of production that there is in feedlot beef. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It ain't easy for any farmer, whether it's a bison rancher or a cattle farmer, but I think the bison farming is worth it.
Yeah, and you mentioned a lot of good points too. Is this something I've ran into recently, just processing and shipping across state lines? Like the USDA and state classifications of bison, it's considered an exotic animal. So sometimes you get like a benefit from that, being able to get above some of these USDA rules. But then sometimes for the processing, people just don't want to touch it. And that could be a huge issue, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, by the time you get into what's called amenable species or non-amenable species, there's weird rules that you basically can't mix bison meat with other meats and sell like a bison pork sausage or anything like that. Bison's really lean, helps adding some fat to it to make other types of products. And again, just strange rules when it comes to it. But and truthfully, I don't even know them all. I am not a meat seller or producer.
Yeah.
Animals whole usually. That's been more of our model, but we're working more towards getting smaller producers to get stuff to market, and that's been my major focus.
Yeah, and that makes sense too. So getting into the wool, I guess, is your selling point coming from all natural fibers, like plastic stuff is bad for you, or this will keep you warm, or everything? I guess maybe give the audience a 30-second spiel on, why is bison wool fiber and maybe just all natural fibers, whatever your products, because I know a lot of them contain a blend with sheep wool. Why is this such a great product?
Well, the reason I start out with usually is if you look at the environment that the animal lives in, whether it is high mountains or wide plains, extreme heat or extreme cold, bison are adapted. And the reason that they're adapted is because of this fiber. They have this undercoat that we call it down. It's a secondary coat down close to their skin. It's a very short, very crimpy fiber. And I can probably have some examples of it around here. I'll show you. Stacy's packing stuff up now. It works. It keeps you dry. It's the only natural fiber that wicks moisture in its vapor state. So it'll pull water away from your feet, the sweat, before it can condense and cool you down. It also does that great when it's cold. It keeps your feet dry and doesn't allow the wet to transmit the cold. It's extremely insulating. The University of South Dakota has said that it's 12 times more insulating than sheep's wool. I don't know that and there's so many factors that go into that. I can't say that that's actually true or not, but it is definitely more insulating, and a fair bit so. We started originally just making yarn for hand knitting, and really even before that, just providing fiber for people who spin their own yarn to make, and that was kind of how we got started. But as we've learned a little bit more, as we've learned the better uses of it, we've sort of advanced, and as we learned how to make things ourselves, I mean, I was sitting there hand knitting socks when we started and hand spinning yarn. But our business has evolved as our knowledge has grown. And part of the reason we go to Alaska and spend a lot of time there is because these people know what you need when it's cold or wet or whatever. And so listening, learning, and taking back what we've picked up and going back there with a product, we learn pretty quickly what works. That's kind of been our big model.
So getting into that down layer, so that's something sheep don't have, or they do?
Some sheep, Jacob sheep, have. There are lots of double-coated animals. The most common of which is cashmere. Cashmere is the undercoat hair from a goat. Not all goats have it, but some breeds do.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
There's a lot of animals that have that secondary coat. A lot of dogs do. But it's that very fine, very soft, crimpy little fiber that just works great at trapping dead air. So when you take that crimpy little fiber and twist it into a yarn, it just makes air pockets. Air pockets are where you get the insulation, not necessarily the fiber itself. So the more fine air pockets you have that are stable, the warmer your product is going to be. And Bison does that so far better than anything we've ever seen. And I've got a flat out challenge out there that there's just not a warmer sock on the planet.
Actually, I'm going to grab my bison hide real quick. It's like right next to me. I want to show a visual here.
Okay. I'm going to grab some of the down. I'm going to be 2 seconds here. Sorry, more than an arm's length away. This is a bag of our spinning fiber. We still sell quite a bit of it. But that's the down fiber. Really soft, really short, and again, you can, when you twist it and make yarn out of it, because that's all yarn is it just made a bunch of air pockets there. So
Sorry, I was on mute. But yeah,
No,
that makes sense. I was just grabbing this because it was right next to me. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible. Actually, like, you know, I use this kind of like a blanket or an under cover. It's huge. It's like a big bull hide. And it's so warm. Like, it's, if you sleep on top of this, I'm actually going to try some like winter camping in my Forerunner this winter for ski trips. I think you can sleep on this in like 20, 30 degree weather and you'll be like totally warm, even with just like a light blanket on top. Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, should you be surprised? Like, these animals can thrive at like absurdly low temperatures.
we have friends who have a ranch up in Delta Junction, Alaska, and their temperatures there can get down to -60, -70.
Oh,
I mean, that to me is just mind blowing. I can't comprehend that sort of lack of. I mean, that's something, and the animals do well in it. They they don't necessarily seek shelter, and they will go out and be just fine. So now we have most of the mushers that are out there are wearing our socks out at 60 below. That's cold, and it works. And I agree. If you've used a bison hide as a sleeping bag, you will never go back. They're incredible.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I've used your gloves. I love your gloves, and I'm curious as well. Did you start making like 100% bison wool products, and then start mixing with sheep wool because it's just easier to? There's not enough bison fiber to go around, or you think that's like a happy medium? I'm curious there. What's the reason behind that, or how many of your products?
Well, when we started originally, we were making 100% bison down gloves. And our first product was fingerless gloves for fly fishing, mostly because of the way it deals with moisture. I mean, if it's raining and snowing, it's going to roll right off. If you dip your hand in the river, grab a fish, even if the glove's totally soaked, you shake off the excess, it'll pull that moisture away from your skin and it stays dry. So,
wow.
Yeah, that was our first product because it was simple. And then when we started looking into socks, socks are a little different from gloves. Gloves are easy. You make them hand-shaped, and you make them as warm as possible. Because if you get too warm in your gloves, you can take them off real easily. When you get into socks take a lot more engineering to make them useful. You can't necessarily stop and take your boots off in the middle of the woods if your feet get a little warm. That's not something that's ever happened.
Yeah.
And socks take a lot more abuse and a lot more fiber. So in order to make them more affordable, we blend with sheep's wool. There is, any number of benefits to good wool. We work with a number of ranchers in Colorado and a couple on the Pacific Northwest for our bison, for our sheep's wool, and they raise amazing animals and take good care of them and do nice stuff. So blending the fiber was originally somewhat cost effective, but also sort of kind of mitigating the insulation factor. People don't necessarily need a sock that's great at -80.
Yeah, no, because then you'll be sweating, and then that moisture can make you colder, actually, right?
Yeah,
so
and again, that's their benefit, is they're pulling that sweat away, but you don't.
Oh yeah.
And I just was challenged by a really interesting guy on Twitter to make some 100% bison down socks. I haven't done it in the past for a couple of reasons, mostly durability. All of our socks are made with what we call a base yarn, and that's an all natural, whether it's a bison and merino, bison and bamboo, or bison and silk. And then on the outside of the sock, we knit a fair bit of nylon for reinforcement under the heel, under the ball of the foot, toes, kind of thing like that. But there are people who have a lot of aversion to synthetics, and I can't necessarily say that I blame them. So we are going to start we're going to try. I say we're going to start. We're going to experiment and see if we can do it.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, it's really tough. And, I'm a bit of a purist myself, but it's, with some things like with socks, it is really hard. And at the end of the day, and you're saying it's, more on the outside. Yeah, it's a compromise. But if you're 80-90% wool, that's not, so much better than what everything else, what's in everything else. That's just all polyester nylon typically. So
it is. And what I hear from a lot of people is, they'll grab a sock, they'll look at the back and the label and look at the ingredients list on it. And these are done, the ingredients are done by weight, not necessarily by volume. So like this sock, this is one of our new kid socks, 36% merino wool, 30% bison down, 21% nylon, 10% acrylic, 2% spandex, and 2% polyester. Well, so that 60% of the yarn of the sock, which is natural fiber, is about 90% of the actual volume. Bison down is really light. Wool is moderately light. Nylon is really heavy. So even though the only nylon is, see this dark brown on the outside and this red at the top, that's where the nylon is in the sock. The body of the sock and everything, all the terry loop and everything that touches you is natural fiber. And again, I have sort of mixed feelings about using it, but I figure if you pay $40-$45 for a pair of socks, it better last you forever. And the easiest way to do that is put lots of nylon on the heel and toe where you're not going to wear it.
That makes sense. It's a compromise.
It is a compromise, and I appreciate the enthusiasts and the purists, and I definitely respect that. I don't know which way. I mean, not knowing exactly which way to go. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, you want to make a good product, so it's already a better product. Like in all other facets, having the bison down and the sheep merino wool. So people need to just understand that. And yeah, that's the tough part. But you're saying you do make 100% bison down gloves though?
Well,
or no?
I don't. I mean, that was our first product. Now our gloves
okay.
Now our gloves are 90% bison.
Okay, because I have a pair of gloves and they're on the lighter side and they're great for just like an everyday winter glove. But I think they were like maybe 60% or I don't remember exactly.
Well, we make two different yarn blends for the gloves. We make a 90-10 bison and nylon and a 50-50 bison and wool.
That's sort of the 50-50. Okay.
You got the 50-50. Those are what we call our advantage gloves. Half wool cuts the cost basically in half. Wool is, $9 a pound. Bison's about $300 a pound.
Wow.
We originally started with a mill, what they call a mini mill, a very small mill. There's a company out of Prince Edward Island that makes mini mills equipment. And it's a very small, low production mill that, makes 4 pounds of yarn a day, but it can handle very, very fine fibers. Moving to the mill that we've been spinning at for the last 10 years, it's much larger equipment and it's built for commercially spinning wool in the 100 pounds a day kind of range. But bison fiber's really too short to go through the entire carding process by itself. A wool card is a very large, long machine with lots of rollers and places where the fiber has to kind of travel through. Adding a little bit of nylon to it helps it travel through the machinery better than anything else. That's one of the challenges in processing bison fiber is it's a shorter staple length fiber than just about anything else out there. So trying to make sure that it is spun and contained and is not going to wear and pill, that's why we add the nylon.
Okay. That was kind of going to be my next question is, how does the processing compare and can you use that same equipment? So it's like you can, the same equipment as wool, but it seems like you can, but there's a few trade-offs or things you need to do. Right. And how many mills are even open to doing that? Probably not a lot.
That's now, and one of the big things since we started doing this is we've been watching the textile industry leave the United States.
Are you interested in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished bison meat? I'm excited to be a partner with Falls Family Ranches. Based in Wyoming, Falls Family Ranches is raising high-quality bison meat the way nature intended. As a native large ruminant of North America, bison is one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can consume. If you're interested in trying out their bison boxes, use code Tristan, Tristan, 10 for 10% off your first order.
It's
That too, yeah.
It's really heartbreaking watching not just the equipment, which has been going overseas since we started, but the experience. I mean, once you lose these people with this knowledge, you're not able to make things anymore. This knowing how to do a lot of this is crucial. The mill that we've spun at forever was in Millbury, Massachusetts, S&D Spinning. Amazing folks. 5th generation, 5 brothers that ran the mill. And besides spinning our yarn, their primary product was really spinning the yarn for Rawlings baseballs. They've basically made every baseball since the 1800s. They closed in December. And that was a huge heartbreak to us. But another mill in Wisconsin has bought the equipment and some of the business book from them. And John Durnley, the man who ran the yarn side of S&D, literally took their cards apart, which are the big machines that process the fiber, by hand, himself. No books, no pictures, no sketches and diagrams. These machines are 50 yards long, and I cannot tell you how many thousands of bolts and nuts and washers and bearings, and it's just mind-blowing. Took it apart, moved it to Wisconsin, put it back together. Did 4 of them. So yeah, watching the textile industry leave has been really hard, and there are still some good mills left in the United States, but fewer and fewer every day. And I've heard that there was one new textile mill built in California in the last 5 years, but no other large scale commercial mills have been built.
Yeah, it's really crazy, and I've gone down this rabbit hole for natural fibers. There's just such little production in the United States, and then you just get into this whole mess. It's like, okay, do you trust, say, organic cotton that's coming from India or China? I don't, as highly as if it came from the US, and it just doesn't make any sense. And I have a few friends that have tried to get in this apparel space, and they've voiced that concern. And for me, just looking to support people who are made in the US, it's crazy. Why do you think? It's just from a cost perspective, it's cheaper to do everything overseas? Do you think it's a labor issue? No one wants to run these mills. It's not worth it. What do you think are the main driving factors?
Some of it is definitely labor. I mean, it is labor intensive trying to do this. Cost factor, I can produce, if I wanted to make socks in China, it would cost me less to produce a dozen than it does one pair here. So yeah, that's huge. And that's why most companies do go overseas, is because it is just significantly cheaper. I don't want to do that. I don't have to do that. And we're not going to do that. We're going to do our best to help keep mills here in the U.S. busy. We work with a lot of other smaller yarn producers and try and help them find ways to fill in the gaps in the mills in their workbook and what they can produce. So, I mean, we got to keep these guys busy, or they're going to go away, and that's something we've always known, and been our business, just to make sure that we can keep them as busy as we can.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. And for me, we've talked to the Woolshire, which I don't know if you've interacted with on Twitter. He's making wool pillows, organic cotton covers, and he was talking about that and kind of the mill. I just discovered a mill in Wyoming that I'm going to contact as well. And it's like, I think, important for people to reach out and ask what's going on and support this local business. And maybe and what I want to get into more is maybe a little bit of other products like sweaters and jackets or coats, things with Bison down. But yeah, if my mom sent it to me, she's like, yeah, it's $160 for a wool sweater. But I was like, yeah, but that's 100% raised, made, and spun in Wyoming. Like, I'm gonna buy that 100.
Mountain Meadows.
Yeah. So you probably knew them.
Folks, wonderful people, good producers. Yeah, again, the number of mills in this country you can count on, both hands and 2 feet, and that's about it. So there is not a lot of external stuff, but yeah, support them if you can, and they make good stuff. I would definitely recommend them highly.
Yeah, we'll probably get them on the show as well, and I mean that's like 2 hours for me, so it's really cool. And you just, like food, like everything, the price has been held artificially low via cheap ingredients, external manufacturing, external labor costs being extremely low, and that's why you got $1.99 a pound chicken. That's not real. That doesn't exist. That's not possible. It's not possible to have a $5, $10 t-shirt either, unless you have like these massive factories using synthetically grown cotton or really, really cheap plastic that's a byproduct from petrochemical industry, and that's being labored by people in Southeast Asia or China for pennies an hour. So if you do the math, it's really simple to understand that these things that are high quality are worth the value that you pay for them. But you can't be upset about that, and you should support it, because that's what's going to keep these folks in business, and yourself and everybody, and that's trying to do this the right way. And then it's going to last longer. It's going to, you have a higher ROI because you're paying more up front for something that'll last you longer, as opposed to paying more over time. Whereas, especially considering inflation and everything, that's probably in your best interest to do that anyway. So yeah, it spans across everything, and it's just crazy when you make this connection in your head that it's not just food, it's it's literally everything, and clothes is probably maybe the next biggest one where you can see that kind of holding truth.
And you literally just wrote like our entire fall ad campaign for us. You just all the things you did. Seriously, that was eloquent. And I can tell you real quick how you can do $1.99 a pound chicken healthy and safely. Grow it yourself. The problem is most people aren't going to raise a sheep and spin their own sweater. But you're absolutely right. In order to do this in a, I hate to use the word responsible, but that's what it is. It's caring for our resources. So in order to do it right and not just, use kids in Asia and cheap Chinese oil, based stuff, it is going to cost you. But your $160 sweater, made from Wyoming grown wool, is going to last you the rest of your life. It's not going, if you get a hole in it, you darn it, you fix it. But it will last you pretty much forever. And buying better and buying a little bit less might be the future of things, as we do start to realize what we have to do to enjoy the better things in life. I think that we've been sort of conditioned that, here, you go buy this product that was made overseas from oil, and this is what you wear when it's out there. Other people who can afford to wear cashmere or bison or whatever, they get the good stuff. I don't like that. I want to make stuff that every individual can use. It is still stupidly expensive. I get less than a pound of down per bison. So that's about 4 pairs of socks, by the time we get down to it.
4 socks, you said? 4 pairs of socks?
4 to 6 pairs of socks, depending on the socks. In the processing, what we have to do is we're shearing the hides. I mean, I want to make it very clear that we are working with animals that have been processed for meat. But we'll shear the hides, and we'll shear it in the area where the fiber is going to be at least 3/4 to an inch long. So that kind of limits it to a, depending on the size of the animal and their hair growth, anything from a, 1.5 foot spot to maybe a 2.5 foot circle around the heart lungs.
So
area.
kind of really only in this nice and thick spot, right? Not anywhere, because down here it's a lot shorter down here by the rump, I guess.
Yeah, no, the fiber gets significantly shorter. We do still use that. Again, we don't want to waste anything. We've started making a lot of felted products, which I can do with shorter fiber that doesn't have to be spun into yarn. doesn't have to go through the carding process. So non-wovens, the felted material, we make some insulation batting, we make some garden underlayment, we make some other things from that short fiber. But that gold, the down, the really gold stuff, that's very limited. And the amount of processing that has to go through, we have to separate the guard hair, the coarse crunchy stuff, from that fine soft down. So it has to go through a fairly specialized piece of equipment that there's just really not much in the US. We're working with a Canadian partner now who has a large dehairing machine, and we're working with a mill in Michigan that does just a beautiful job with a very small machine, but it's slow, it's expensive, and it's a lot of labor. So getting this fiber and making it usable takes a lot of time and money. And like I said, my costs on the down, even doing this essentially ourselves, still come out to be about $300 a pound. That's a lot for hair, I think.
Mm-hmm.
As we advance, it has come down some. We have improved basically yield and process and gotten better results and more usable fiber. That brings the overall cost down. And now we've gotten it to a sustainable level where we can afford to keep doing this, where we can make sure that we can pay these guys who are doing it, whether it's the ranchers, the shearers, the mill, the dehairing mill, the spinning mill, or the knitting mill. And everyone along that way needs to make a living wage. And that's how we keep doing this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I wasn't aware of the intricacies of the process, but of course, yeah, then that adds up. So that's what it takes.
There's a reason that nobody has really done this up till now. It's because it's hard and it's expensive and it's a little silly, but it's worth it.
That's badass though, and there's a reason why it's the best fiber. The most insulative. It's moisture wicking. To me, it's worth it. It's awesome. But I'm curious some things with the wool. I noticed about your gloves, they're not itchy at all. This is like a common criticism of wool. Is bison in general. I mean, I've slept on my bison hide. Like it can get a tiny bit itchy, but this is not even, it's a straight up bison hide. I think it's fine, but this is a common concern of wool. So I'm curious, is bison better for this? Is the processing how you do? I know when you boil wool multiple times, that can help. So what do you say to people that say it's too itchy?
Well, and here's what it really comes down to is the quality of processing. We work with one Canadian producer who makes really high-end, fancy, nice stuff. Their company up in Banff called Kivyuk with a K. They also process a lot of muskox fiber. Their quality is phenomenally exceptional. I mean, they have removed every piece of guard hair from the down. And when you do that, you get a lesser yield, but you get a much softer product. The down fiber itself is comparable to good cashmere. So getting all of that guard hair out, because that guard hair is what's going to be the itchy bit, if there is anything, getting it down to zero makes for something that's just total pure luxury, and it's absolutely beautiful. We have a couple of different standards that we use for the dehairing. We try to get less than 4 guard hairs per what they call a 4-inch pole, where you take the fiber and stretch it out. I'm sorry, I have the fiber right here. You take the fiber and you stretch it out over a 4-inch square place. You should have less than X number of guard hairs in that. I don't even know if you
can see a little bit, yeah.
See a little bit. There's a little bit in here, but in doing that, we get probably 20 to 30% more than Fernando and the Kivyuk folks do with their dehairing. Their fiber ends up costing them closer to $800 a pound. So they get a better quality product. It costs a lot more. Again, you sort of have to choose a balance of how far do you go, to get to perfection. And then in blending it, keeping itch factor down comes to keeping fibers compatible, because when you twist them all into your yarn, if you have something that doesn't fit right, you're going to get kind of spikes coming out, and that doesn't help. So I'm very cautious to make sure that we blend with things that are going to mate well with the bison, that are going to keep smooth and soft. Like our silk blend stuff, we do a lot with silk because it's pretty amazing fiber too. It's just like sticking your foot into a cloud. Same with the gloves and hats and scarves coming out of it. The Bison merino stuff is pretty soft. I have an amazing wool partner in Oregon, and she does an incredible job at producing very, very soft, fine merino wool that mates up nicely with the Bison. We actually have to cut it to match length so that it fits well with it. We've had to learn a lot of stuff to figure out how to do this and make it comfortable. For the most part, though, everything we do is really soft and feels good. My wife is the judge on everything before we put it out to the product, and she is so sensitive, it's not funny.
Yeah, well, it's something I noticed with the gloves is like they're incredible. You don't have any. I'm less sensitive. I can deal with a little bit of itch, but it's something that my friends and family have mentioned as we get in this natural fiber rabbit hole. But I'm curious as well. You know, we talked about the wool sweaters. You're doing predominantly, you know, gloves, hats, socks, right? And yeah, is that due to the availability and the cost mostly? Like those are kind of, you're hitting on, you know, something that's reasonable for people to buy. You know, those are the coldest areas usually when you're out in the winter. Will there ever be a Bison down sweater, jacket, coat? You think these are feasible?
I did a bunch of quarter zip tops that are, you know, hunting tops, kind of a mid-layer quarter zip shirt. Yeah, those have been exceptional. I think we're almost sold out again. I'm making a vest right now with a using a batting made from some of the shorter fiber again. So we're going to do like a puffy down style vest that goes over the quarter zip. But in general, the majority of people that complain about being cold, it's literally head, hands, and feet. Those are the easiest things. You keep those warm, and you're usually pretty good. There's a lot of good coats and sweaters and jackets out there that would not be 600. You know, it hasn't made a lot of sense to do it. A lot of times we do things based on just what makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's just, for me, it's interesting. And it's like, if you could go back in time, you know, what were Lewis and Clark and folks just crossing the plains and the natives, like what were they using? And it was a lot of bison and a lot of all natural fibers, obviously. So to me, it's like if you waved a magic wand and could just like totally change the outdoors industry, you know, jackets, sleeping bags, what have you, what would you do? How would that look? And to me, it's going back to natural fibers, but what does that do to cost and weight, I guess, is the other big one for backpacking and stuff like that. But it's fascinating to think about, because it's like, to me, it's a juxtaposition. Go nature, it's really good for you, but here you go. We're going to sleep on plastic, live in plastic, wear plastic, eat out of plastic. It's like a joke, to be honest. So I've been trying to do my best to move to more natural things, but it's a challenge, really.
Absolutely. And again, you know, it's going back to the food. Unless you're doing it yourself, you're relying on somebody else to produce it, somebody else to grow it, somebody else to process it. It's hard. I mean, it just is. And every time, you know, from a business standpoint, anytime you can find a cost savings, most people just take it. Sometimes we kind of look for, you know, I hate to say look for the more expensive way, but I want to look for the people that can do the best work, the best quality, just guaranteed. Since we started doing this, like I said, we really launched Buffalo Gold, which was our first brand. That was with my father in 2005. We have sold out of our primary products now, you know, 18 years running. And we still do. So people have responded well. You know, if you ever go through and look at the reviews on our stuff, it's just amazing what people do. I get floored every day by just how cool people are and what they're out doing in this stuff. But it works, and we've been very blessed that they have been able to keep making stuff and keep getting it out there. So we're just going to keep doing it.
So selling out constantly. So is it still the biggest bottleneck then, is just getting enough supply?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, truly, I can harvest from hides that are processed January through mid-April maybe. And you talked originally about 160,000 cattle being processed in a day. Last year there were like 54,000 bison processed, and how many of them were processed in that time frame? Less than a third. Yeah. So I think we harvested from about 12,000 animals last year. That was a lot. And as the industry grows, it's going to just keep growing. We have increased every year the harvest and keep making more stuff.
So you're probably then at that math, you're probably harvesting the vast majority of animals that are being processed in that time period in the nation, or at least a majority, a good chunk.
We're doing a good chunk. I mean, I would like to do more, and we keep trying to figure out ways to be able to do more with more ranchers. But it's a challenge, and and again, I don't think we're ever going to get to 10,000 bison processed in a day. Even if get to a fraction of the beef industry. But if we do, there are going to be a lot more stocks.
That makes sense. Yeah, well, and it makes sense. That's when you want to slaughter the animal for peak hide performance, I guess, or peak coat.
The problem is that we're not enough of a factor in the industry to determine when animals are being processed. The meat demand is, and that's.
Oh yeah, no, totally. But if everyone, because our ranch in Wyoming, that was what we decided is kind of late fall, winter makes the most sense. So, and a lot of that is because we do want to use the whole animal, including the hide. But a lot of people are just dictated by meat. So it's like if you have this change in mindset, then maybe more and more folks would consider late fall, winter harvest only. But then who's going to fill the grocery stores full of bison in the summer?
Right. Again, and the nice thing is the industry is still small enough that people talk, people work together. It's one of the neatest things, just watching bison ranchers working together and planning and things. It's not like I see a lot of the beef industry where it gets quite competitive between individual ranchers and producers. Bison ranchers, for the most part, realize that they will never meet the demand, and so as such, they figure that the more people that are doing it, the bigger the pie grows, and it's better for all of us. So
that was something I noticed for sure at the Bison, the NBA Winter Conference, was the camaraderie, the teamwork, the cohesion in the bison industry. It's really inspiring, actually. It's cool, and to me, that's why it's like, wow, I'm pretty bullish on bison, because there's a lot of teamwork going on here. There's collaboration, and it's the way to move forward. And that's decentralized. That's a community that's powerful, and we need to go against the JBSs and the Cargills of the world. But no, that truly is. It's really cool, and yeah, I mean, maybe we'll have to chat, because we have some bison that we're going to be slaughtering in the winter. We just got kicked out of our one processor who's changed ownerships. Classic, but we're figuring that out. So it actually might be even more in the January to March timeframe. So
I wish I'd heard that. I hear that story way too often.
It's crazy, and I'm new in this space too, and it's happened more than once. So yeah, it's wild. But Ron, where can people buy these amazing bison products?
Well, for the most part, easiest way is thebuffalowoolco.com. That's our primary website, and that's where we got stuff. There's also a number of bison ranchers around the country who, when they have farm shops, a lot of them carry our products. And we're just about to be able to start putting vending machines on military bases around the country.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's cool.
This happened. So
awesome. And you're on Twitter, at Buffalo Guy Ron. Your handle's like at username something, right? Is that by accident or on purpose?
Yeah. I've had a couple of different Twitter handles. We had the Buffalo Woolco account, and know what happened, but lost a few of those and signed up one day and just kind of clicked with this at username 29. At username 2994544. I have no idea what that means.
We'll have to link that below, but for sure check out Buffalo
Right.
Wolf. I'm gonna go on the website as well. Winter, yeah, I've been in the summer mindset, but winter's coming back, and I really love those gloves. And
Winter is coming, and I'll send you the link for Native because it's incredible. Charlie and Shauna have done an absolutely incredible job with it. It's really exciting to watch.
Awesome, yeah, that trailer probably get me fired up. So we'll link that below. And yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Ron. This is a fun conversation.
Thank you, Tristan. I truly appreciate it. This was awesome, brother. All right.
Have a good one, everyone.
You
Thanks
too.
for tuning in.